everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is my mid-month April check-in. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and today I thought we'd have a chat about how my reading is going in April. And I have finished a couple of really big books that I'm pleased about finishing. And I also would like to tell you about a couple of books that I plan to read next, and that might be a tiny bit of a mini book haul as well. So yeah, April has got off to a good start. I've read 7 books so far. One of those was a really short essay, and 2 of those were carried on from March, but I'm really pleased to get some things finished. And I think 7 books is fine considering how big some of the books were. So the first thing I finished was The Raven's Knot, which was the second book in the Tales from the Weird Museum trilogy by Robin Jarvis. I started reading this trilogy in middle grade March and I really enjoyed the first book. This second book didn't quite live up to the promise of the first one. I think it suffered quite badly from not having the same characters that it had in the first one. I still really like the main character Neil, but I just felt that this series is going a bit too much into like really ancient things that I'm not sure whether middle graders would enjoy, but I enjoyed this alright, it was fine. Secondly, I reread Sparkling Cyanide for Christie Fest. This is a really enjoyable standalone Christie book, all about a memorial dinner for a woman who died the year before, which leads to a second very similar murder. I think this is a fairly standard Agatha Christie, but not quite told in the same way as some of her others, so I would recommend it if you're reading through Agatha Christie, but it's not one of my absolute favourites. Next I finished an audiobook which was Enduring Love by Ian McEwan. I read this for AJ Dunn's Killer Reads Thriller Month book club and I really enjoyed it. I think I probably would have enjoyed it more reading it as a physical book because I didn't really enjoy the narrator, which was David Threlfall. He did a really good voice for the main character, but I felt that his voices, particularly for the females in the book, and there is quite a main female character in it, were just terrible, and I didn't really enjoy those voices at all. Yeah, the audio did let it down a little bit, but this book has just an absolutely amazing opening. First 2 chapters are about like a disaster that sort of kickstarts the plot, a tragic event, and the tragic event is just described in such a fascinating way, and the narrator is in first person narration. The narrator gives perfect amounts of information. It's just really well done. I would say that the first 2 chapters are right up there with best first chapters because it was fantastic. There's a little bit too much description for my liking in some of the rest of the book, but I did enjoy it and it was a good suspenseful thriller. I also have read another audiobook this month, which was Careless by Kirsty. This is a book which is on the long list for the Women's Prize this year, and I buddy read it with Gemma Books and Annie's World of Books, and it was a really enjoyable buddy read. We had a great time with this, and this was such a fantastic book. So it centres around and is told by Bess, who is a 15-year-old girl who's in care, and at the beginning of the book she finds out that she is pregnant at age 15, and the book follows her sort of decisions that she has to make, and also gives us the background on this pregnancy. And I thought it was a really good look at the care system, and there were things in this that really surprised me and like shocked me as to how brutal they were, but it's really fantastically written. I think Kirsty Capes herself is a care leaver and she'd done a really good job here in my opinion, and I really hope it gets onto the shortlist. I won't say any more about it here because I think I'm going to do a separate review of Careless. So on to one of the big ones. My next buddy read was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, and I buddy read this with Jack at Spread Book Joy, and I'm so glad that I had Jack with me on the journey that is reading this massive, crazy book. So where to start about House of Leaves. I suppose House of Leaves is famous for having lots of different things going on, weird layouts of pages and so on. In essence, this book is about a character called Johnny Truant who finds a manuscript left behind by an old man called Zampano, who has been writing it for years and years and has since died. And it's all about a lost film that Zampano is obsessed with called the Navidson Record. And so it's a story within a story, and the best parts for me were the parts where the Navidson Record was being described in detail, because this story, the Navidson Record, is basically the story of a film that is made by the titular Navidson about his house that he and his wife and children move into, which is a very strange house. And I won't say any more about the house because I don't want to spoil it, but it's a very unsettling book, and it's told in lots of different ways. So there are a lot of sort of academic type bits, there's a lot of footnotes in this book, but there's also some really, really excellent storytelling, and it's very, very clever. So the bit I liked best was the Navidson Record storyline, especially the parts where the contents of the film was actually being described to us. And my favourites were, there were pages where the text arrangement sort of reflects the happenings in the Navidson Record. So for example, the text being at the bottom kind of represents like the different locations, I guess, in the book. It's tough to explain, but that was my absolute favourite part of it. I thought it was very, very clever. What I disliked was around about chapter 13 and 14. I got very fed up with footnotes by this stage, and these two chapters in particular were just so academic, and they were not only academic but they had lots of things missing, and I found that quite annoying. So my top tip for tackling House of Leaves is definitely take a buddy with you into the labyrinth that is this book. Yeah, without Jack, I don't think I would have got through this book, certainly not as quickly as we did. There's a particularly tricky chapter, chapter 9, which involves lots of footnotes all going in different directions on pages that you have to follow through. So my other top tip would be, when you're going into chapter 9, be aware that you probably will need to read it in one sitting, at the risk of losing where you are. Planning to read it in one sitting, you might need to make yourself drinks and a picnic to take with you, because you won't be leaving your reading area for some time. So yeah, I did overall enjoy House of Leaves. I'm really, really glad I finally read it after 10 years of it sitting on my shelf, and I'm really pleased to have read it. I wouldn't say I understand everything about it, but I'm glad I've gone into House of Leaves and come out the other side. So really pleased about that one. I've also read this month a short essay called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. This is an essay by Katherine Rundell, and it was recommended to me by Jack over at Spread Book Joy. If you haven't checked out Jack's video about why adults read children's books, I highly recommend that, and I will link it down below. She talks about that essay in the video, and I highly recommend the essay if you want to know about the pleasures of reading children's books. It's a really well done essay, and it's only about 40 pages long, so easy to read. Also over this weekend, I finally managed to finish Those Bones Are Not My Child by Toni, Cade, Bambara. This was another read for AJ Dunn's Killer Reads Thriller Month Book Club, and this was the March pick, and it's taken me all throughout March and most of April to get through this, because it's nearly 700 pages long. The content is very, very heavy. I had to put it down a couple of times because there's some very distressing events in this. Basically, this centres around some true life missing children and murdered children cases in Atlanta in the 1980s. It paints a really interesting portrait of sort of race relations in Atlanta at that time, and it's a really, really eye-opening book, and I'm glad I've read it because I feel that this is an important book in the commentary it gives about racial prejudice towards these mothers and fathers who have lost their children, and at times it was just absolutely devastating. This was actually published posthumously. The author, I found out from the acknowledgements, worked on this over a period of 15 years, and it was edited subsequently by Toni Morrison. I would be really, really interested to know whether the author herself would have edited this more, because I read online that Toni Morrison actually cut half of this manuscript, but I find that very, very unbelievable considering how much is still in this book. And not only is the content difficult, but sometimes it's very confusing as to which character you're with, where you are, what's actually happening. It's definitely a worthwhile book, but it did take me a very long time and I found it difficult, and I wouldn't say it was my favourite book. It was good, but I would never read it again, I wouldn't say. It's got some very devastating true life events in it, but it is actually a fictional story about a mother and father, Zala and Spence, who are doing everything they can to look for their missing son, Sonny. My favourite chapter in this that was most coherent was part 6, which was really, really well done. And I also really, really enjoyed any parts of the story that were told by the younger siblings of Sonny, Kofi and Kenty. These were really, really interesting chapters and interesting insight into the family life through the eyes of the younger children. Really glad to have finished reading this one as well. On to some picture books for Picture This 2022. I have so far read 4 of the picture books that I plan to read. I've read Mog on Fox Night, which was a pretty bizarre Mog story by Judith Kerr, but still enjoyed it. I've read That Pesky Rat by Lauren Child, which I would highly recommend because it's hilarious. I enjoyed Freddie and the Fairy by Julia Donaldson and Karen George. So this has got some good, in my opinion, representation of hearing difficulties. The fairy has a hearing aid on in the pictures, and I think that representation is really important because Freddie in the story also learns about how to help the fairy to hear better, and what he can do to help her, like making sure she can see his lips and things like that. So this would probably be a very helpful book if you were trying to explain to children about hearing loss. Yeah, that was a good one. And I've also read Mog's Bad Thing, another pretty bizarre entry in the Mog canon by Judith Kerr, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Coming on to what I still haven't finished, I'm currently reading still Don Quixote. Not much progress to report. And I am over halfway through the final book in the Tales from the Weird Museum trilogy, The Fatal Strand. Confession time. This was added to the TBR this month. My husband bought me this to cheer me up one day, so yeah, that's another hauled book, but I'm going to read it before the end of the month so that it doesn't have to be added onto the giant TBR. And I've also been very lucky this month that some of my friends have sent me book mail. So I'll show you my mini book haul of book mail. My lovely friend Gemma over at Gemma Books has sent me How to Order the Universe by Maria Jose Ferrada, which she read for the BookTube Prize and offered to pass on to me, which I'm really, really pleased with. And this is quite a small one, so I'm hoping to read this as soon as I've finished The Fatal Strand, so that it doesn't have to add to the giant TBR. So thank you, Gemma, for sending me that lovely book. I was also kindly sent 2 books by Emily from Novell Novels. Emily found me Rilla of Ingleside, which I can't read just yet because it's not time for this one yet in the Analong, but this will be very helpful when we get to the right month to read the final book, Rilla of Ingleside. And after I've read How to Order the Universe, I'm planning to pick up this thriller that Emily has passed on to me, which she spoke about in her wrap-up, The Disappearance by Annabelle Cantaria. And this thriller sounds right up my street, so I'm going to plan to read this month so that it also doesn't add to the giant TBR. So thank you to my lovely booktuber friends for continually trying to sabotage my TBR. I do really appreciate you passing these books on to me because I'm sure I'll really enjoy them. So that was the mini book haul. The only other things that I've still got on the go are Pachinko for the Pachinko Along hosted by Gemma Books. and I'm really enjoying that. I'm already have finished book 1 and book 2 of Pachinko, and I'm desperate to get on with reading book 3. And I've also started listening to Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. That's for a new project that I've decided to do, which I'll tell you some more about in a future video. Please do comment down below and let me know how you're getting on with reading in April. Have you read any really good books? Have you read any really big books? And if you've read House of Leaves, please do let me know what you thought and whether you had similar feelings to me. If you've enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I would love to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.